You guys can see that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're going to go through chapter 4 today, both A and B, because I want to do a review session on Wednesday. Okay, so let's go through chapter 4. Tissue. Tissue basically is individual body cells that get together to form one or more functions together. Basically, it's a group of cells similar in structure that perform common or related functions. The study of tissues is called histology. Basically, there are 4 different types of tissues. Epithelial cells, and those tissues cover things like your skin. Connective tissue, they support things. Muscle tissue moves, and nervous tissue controls. So here we have it. Nervous tissue includes the brain, the spinal cord, and all the nerves. Muscle tissue is movement, and it is all attached to bone or the muscles of the heart or the muscles of the walls of the hollow organs, otherwise known as smooth muscle. Epithelial tissue forms the boundaries between different cells and also the boundaries between the environment. It protects, it secretes, it absorbs, and it filters. Basically, it's your skin, the glands of the body, and the lining of the digestive tract. Connective tissue you will learn is the most abundant tissue in your body. It supports, it protects. Bones, tendons, and fat are known as connective tissue. Don't worry about microscopy. You're not going to be looking under a microscope in this class. You will in your lab, but I'm not going to ask you any questions on microscopy of human tissue. That's a lab question, not a class question. All right, epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is a sheet of cells that cover body surfaces or cavities. There are 2 main forms, covering and lining epithelium, which is on the outside and inside surfaces, and the typical example of that is the skin. Glandular epithelium is involved with glands, and the typical example of that is the salivary glands in your mouth. The function of epithelial tissue is to protect. They also absorb, they also filtrate, they also excrete, and they also have sensory reception. There are 7 basic characteristics of epithelial tissue, and we'll talk about each one of them. All of those in black are the 7, or the 5 characteristics, okay? Polarity. Polarity means top or bottom. The apical surface of epithelial tissue is the top. It is the free side. The basal surface is the base or the lower half. The reason the basal surface is so important is because all epithelial cells have a basal surface, but cancer cells do not. That's how cancer cells are able to invade tissue. They don't have a top and a bottom. All right? Here's the apical surface of epithelial cell. Here is the base. Okay? And you can see all these cells are similar, and this makes up epithelial tissue. This is your skin. This is basically your skin. It also has specialized contacts, and we talked about these contacts before. We talked about the junctions. And in epithelial cells, there are two types of junctions. One is tight, and the other is desmosomes. All epithelial tissue is supported by connective tissue. And you really don't have to really know that much about it, but we'll talk about connective tissue in part A also. Okay. And as I said before, cancer epithelial cells don't have a basement membrane. So therefore, they can penetrate boundaries and spread cancer easily. Epithelial tissue has no blood supply. The word for no blood supply is avascular, without vascularity. But it has nerves. It has nerves. Okay, so there are no blood vessels in the skin because they get their nourishment by diffusion from connective tissues. But epithelial tissues do have nerve fibers. So you have touch and itch and all that stuff in your epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has a high regenerative capacity. You lose probably 1 million epithelial cells from your skin every single day, especially if you bathe every day. You wash that useless epithelial cells off of your body. And within 24 hours or 48 hours, that skin is renewed. That skin is renewed. Okay? So it's stimulated by the loss of polarity and broken contact. So when you scrub up with soap, it breaks the polarity and it breaks the contacts. Epithelial tissue classification. The first name indicates the number of cell layers. Epithelial tissues have two names. The word simple means it's one layer thick. The word stratified means there's two or more layers. Your skin is stratified epithelium. The second name indicates the shape of cells. Squamous being flat or scale-like, cuboidal being box-like or cubic, and columnar being tall or column-like. Let me give you some examples. Okay? Simple, one layer. Here it is, one layer. Simple. Stratified, more than one layer. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all of this. Here's the basal surface. Here's the apical surface. This is inside. This is outside. Simple, one layer. Stratified, two or more layers. Squamous, flat. Cuboidal, box-like. Columnar, tall. So, simple epithelium. Simple epithelium is always involved in absorption, secretion, or filtration. Simple squamous, one layer of flat cells. Its function is its function is rapid diffusion. And that rapid diffusion is carbon dioxide and oxygen in your lungs and water and electrolytes in your kidneys. So when you have rapid diffusion, you need simple squamous epithelium, one layer of flat cells. One layer. Here it is. One layer of flat cells in the kidneys and in the lungs. Simple cuboidal, a single layer of cells that looks like boxes. It is involved in secretion, getting rid of fluids and also keeping fluids. And the most common place to have simple cuboidal epithelium is in your kidneys, Also in some ducts of some glandular tissue. Simple cuboidal epithelium, okay? One layer, one box-like layer in your kidney tubules. Simple columnar, a single layer of tall, closely packed cells. These cells are involved in absorption and secretion of mucus and other substances like enzymes. These simple columnar one-layer tall cells are found in the digestive tract, in your gallbladder, in your bronchi of your respiratory system, and in your uterine tubes. One layer of tall cells. Simple columnar epithelium. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Pseudo means false. So they're not really stratified. They're not really stratified. Okay? Columnar tall cells. These cells are involved in secretion, and the secretion is basically mucus. And when you say the word mucus, you always talk about your upper respiratory tract. So in your upper respiratory tract, this is where pseudocolumnar epithelium lives. It looks like more than one layer, but it's only one layer. It's only one layer. Look, all these cells only have one nucleus. It looks like there's more than one layer, but it's only one layer. Only one layer. They secrete mucus. They're in your respiratory tract. All right, any questions on simple epithelium? Okay, let's go to stratified. Remember, stratified means two or more layers. Two or more layers. The newer cells regenerate from below because the basal cells divide and migrate towards the surface. Stratified epithelial cells. Stratified squamous epithelial cells. More than one layer, flat epithelium. This is your skin. Your skin is stratified squamous epithelium. It is the most widespread of all the stratified epithelium. It is located in areas of high wear and tear, and obviously that is your skin. And you'll learn in the integumentary system that it is also covered by a layer of protein called keratin, and we'll talk about that when we get into the integumentary system. Here it is. Stratified, more than one layer of flat cells, stratified squamous epithelium. It's your skin. It is your skin. Stratified cuboidal is quite rare. It really only occurs in your mammary glands. in your mammary glands. Stratified columnar is also limited, and basically it's in the back of your throat, in your pharynx, and in the male urethra. Okay, I'm not going to ask you any questions on these rare things. There's no reason to worry about these two. What I'm going to ask you a question on is stratified squamous epithelium. That's what's more important and much more abundant than these other epithelial cells. Okay, however, I'm going to ask you a question on transitional epithelium, because what does that mean? What does transitional mean? Transitional means it has the ability to change shape, to change shape. And what parts of your body change shape? Well, your bladder certainly does. Okay? It enlarges to hold urine. So it changes shape. The ureters change shape. They also hold urine. Okay? And so does your urethra. All of these, because they change shape, is known as transitional epithelium. The ability to change shape. Here it is. Transitional epithelial cells. All right, here they are. Glands. There's a big difference between endocrine and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands secrete their product into the bloodstream directly. Exocrine glands secrete their product into ducts. So endocrine has no ducts, exocrine has ducts. The endocrine system is a huge system which you talk about in the beginning of Bio 114, okay? But the exocrine system basically is sweat, all right? Basically, what I want you to know about glandular epithelium is the difference between endocrine and exocrine. And I want you to know one more thing. And here it is. How do exocrine glands, remember, exocrine glands secrete their product into ducts. There are three types of modes of secretion of exocrine glands: merocrine, holocrine, and apocrine. Merocrine secrete their products by exocytosis, a bag of sweat, a bag of sweat. Holocrine glands accumulate their products and then they rupture. These are oil glands, sebaceous oil glands. Apocrine exocrine glands accumulate their products, but only the top or the apex ruptures. And this basically is in your breast or mammary glands. These are in your breast, mammary glands. So merocrine, holocrine, and apocrine. Know the difference. So all I want you to know about glandular epithelium is that there are two types, endocrine and exocrine, and I want you to know how the exocrine glands secrete their product: merocrine, holocrine, or apocrine. All right? Okay. Let's go into part B. All right, we've talked about epithelial tissue. Now we're going to talk about the most abundant tissue. The most abundant tissue in your body is connective tissue. Its function is to support, to protect, to insulate, to store fuel, and to transport substances. There are four main classes. The connective tissue, the connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. The comparison of classes are important, and I want you to focus on the types of cells that produce these tissues. So I'm going to focus right here now on connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper. And I'm going to focus on fibroblast. Whenever you see this word blast, it means that these are the cells that produce the tissue. So fibroblasts produce connective tissue proper. Whenever you see the word cytes, that means that these cells maintain the tissue. So fibroblasts produce this, and fibrocytes maintain it. Okay? That is very, very important to understand. I also want you to see this word, adipocytes. Adipocytes maintain adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, you know it as fat. Okay, there you go. Cartilage. There are three subclasses of cartilage. We'll talk about them. Hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Chondroblast. Chondroblast produce cartilage. Chondrocytes maintain cartilage. Bone tissue. We're going to talk a lot about bone. There's a whole chapter. Well, actually, there's more than one chapter on bone. Osteoblast. Produce bone. Osteocytes. Maintain bone. One of the interesting connective tissues is blood. It is the only liquid connective tissue. Okay, the only liquid connective tissue. And it has in it cells, and the cells are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. There are characteristics that make connective tissues different from other primary tissues. And the main thing is right here. The cells are suspended in what we call the ECM, the extracellular matrix. It is a protein-sugar combination. It supports the cells. This ECM supports the cells so you can bear weight, withstand tension, and endure abuse. Only in connective tissues. Another important thing is that most connective tissues have a lot of blood supply. The word vascularity means it has blood supply, especially bone. Bone has a highly endeavored blood supply. However, cartilage has no blood supply. It's avascular. Bone is highly vascular. Cartilage has no blood supply. In the ECM, you have ground substance, fibers, and cells. Okay? The first two elements, ground substance and fibers, is basically the extracellular matrix. So ground substance and fibers is the ECM, Okay? What is ground substance? Basically, ground substance is a gel-like material that fills the spaces between cells. It's composed of interstitial fluid, cell proteins, and sugars, and also water, Okay, you may have heard of chondroitin sulfate and high hyaluronic acid because as you get older, when your joints are starting to calcify, you need more lubricant. And that lubricant is chondroitin sulfate and high hyaluronic acid. And you can buy it at a vitamin store and hopefully have more looseness to your joints. Connective tissue fibers. There are three major types. They all provide support. Collagen, the strongest and most abundant. It is very tough. You also have elastic fibers. They are elastic because these fibers have the ability to stretch and recoil back into their original position. And you also have reticular fibers, which basically give a give to the fibers. So collagen, the strongest, elastic ones that stretch and recoil, and reticular, which give it more tensile strength or give. Here's the word, the cells. Here's the word blast. Whenever you see that word, it means these cells make the substance that we're talking about. Fibroblasts. Fibroblasts make connective tissue. Chondroblasts make cartilage. Osteoblasts make bone. The site cells, fibrocyte, chondrocyte, osteocyte, maintain the health of the matrix. Blast cells produce, site cells maintain. Other types of cells, fat cells. The purpose of fat cells is to store nutrients. Also in your blood, which is a connective tissue, you have white blood cells. White blood cells, neutrophils, eosinophils, and lymphocytes respond to tissue injury. Mast cells. Mast cells are involved in the inflammatory response. Macrophages, big macrophage, eat big eaters. They eat dead cells. They eat organisms. They function in the immune system. The types of connective tissue. Connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. Okay? Here's connective tissue. It has these four divisions. And then they get into all the others. You don't have to know all of these. I'll talk to you about the ones I want you to remember because most of them are extremely important. Connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper basically is everything except bone, cartilage, and blood. And there are two classes. You don't have to know the two classes. I will focus on what you have to know about connective tissue proper. Okay? And here's one you don't have to know. I don't care if you know about areolar connective tissue. It's not that important. Not important. Adipose tissue, however, is important. Adipose tissue, very important. There are two types, white and brown. This is fat tissue, fat tissue. The cells are called adipocytes. Why do you have white fat? You have white fat because of shock absorption, insulation, and energy storage. Okay? You also have brown fat. Brown fat basically produces ATP, heat. That's what you get from brown fat. You get heat. All right? Typical adipose tissue, white fat. You don't have to know about reticular connective tissue. It's not important. The only thing you have to remember about dense connective tissue is elastic tissue. We'll talk about elastic tissue. Don't worry about dense regular. Don't worry about dense irregular. I'm going to focus on elastic connective tissue. Elastic connective tissue. Basically found in ligaments in your body. Basically found in the walls of arteries. Because arteries need to stretch when blood enters, and it needs to recoil back into the original position when blood is out of the arteries. Okay, elastic connective tissue. Cartilage, a big part of connective tissue. It is made from chondrocytes. It is maintained by, chondroblasts. It is maintained by chondrocytes. It is avascular. It has no blood supply. Cartilage has no blood supply. And why is that important? It's important because if you tear your medial collateral ligament, it can be replaced from a cadaver. A dead person can give you a new MCL because it doesn't have any blood supply. Cartilage gets its blood supply from the surrounding tissue. And the surrounding tissue of cartilage is called around chondrium, cartilage. Perichondrium gives rise to not only nutrients, but also gives rise to all the cells. There are 3 types of cartilage. I want you to know them all. Hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant. It actually is blue. It's blue. It's found in the tips of long bones, the nose, the trachea, the larynx, and the ribs. Elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage is elastic. Elastic begins with an E. It is in areas that begin with E, the ears and the epiglottis. So remember, elastic, E, ears, E, epiglottis, E. Fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest of all cartilage. It is found in areas that need the most tension. It bears the most weight. And the areas that bear the most weight in your body are the intervertebral disc of your spine and your knees. It is the strongest of all cartilage, fibrocartilage. Here it is, avascular cartilage. Common injuries in sports, MCL injuries, MCL, medial collateral ligaments. Bone. We'll talk a lot more about bone. It's also called osseous tissue. Its basic function, like all connective tissue, is support and protection and protection. It is made from collagen plus inorganic calcium salts. The osteoblasts produce bone. The osteocytes maintain bone. Bone is highly vascularized, has a lot of blood supply. If you break your thigh bone, you can bleed to death. So it's very important to understand that bone is highly vascularized. Blood, the only liquid connective tissue. Its function is transportation of nutrients and gases. Muscle tissue. We're going to talk a lot more about muscle tissue. You don't really have to know anything about muscle tissue at this juncture. Just know that it has a lot of blood supply. I'm not going to ask you any questions on muscle tissue on exam number 1 because there's a whole section. It's a whole exam, a whole nother exam. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about cardiac muscle tissue. I'm going to ask you a lot more questions. Don't worry about nervous tissue. We'll talk more about nervous tissue when we talk about the brain and the spinal cord and all the other nerves. All right? But you should know about membranes. There are 3 types of membranes in your body: cutaneous, mucous, and serous. Cutaneous membrane, basically it's your skin. And this is what your skin really is: keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. That's your epidermis. That's your epidermis. What does that mean? Keratinized. There's a protein over it to protect it. Stratified. More than one layer of flat cells. Your skin contains 2 basic layers: an outer layer, which is your epidermis, and an inner layer, which is connective tissue, and that is your dermis. It is one of the only dry membranes in your body. It is a dry membrane. So cutaneous membranes are dry membranes. All right? And here it is. This is the skin. This is the skin. Obviously, it covers your entire body, Mucous membranes. Mucous membranes basically produce mucus. They secrete mucus. Okay? Most membranes are bathed by secretion. So this is a wet membrane. All of these membranes line your body cavities. So where do you find mucous membranes? You find them in your digestive tract, in your respiratory tract, and in your urogenital tracts. And they all secrete mucus for lubrication, Here they are. Here's where they are, all right? They're all here in your nasal cavity, in your mouth, in your esophagus, and in your bronchi of your lungs. Serous membranes, also known as serosi, are found in closed ventral body cavities. Very important to understand that it is a 2-layer system. The parietal layer lines the cavity walls. The visceral layer lines the internal organs. The word visceral means organ. Parietal lines the cavity, visceral lines the organs. They all have specific names. The pleurae are the serosal membranes of the lungs. The pericardium is the serosal membrane of the heart, and the peritoneum is the serosal membrane of the abdomen. 2 layers, parietal and visceral. Okay? The last thing we talk about is tissue repair. What happens when your body barriers are compromised, either by trauma, inflammation, or immune responses? Okay? Repair starts very quickly. Repair is the function of inflammatory processes. You cut your arm, you have an infection in your arm. The body reacts very, very quickly. Repair occurs in 2 ways: regeneration or fibrosis. All right? Regeneration or fibrosis. Regeneration is the same kind of tissue replaces the destroyed tissue. Therefore, the original function is restored. In fibrosis, connective tissue replaces destroyed tissue, and the original function is lost. If you cut yourself and there's a growing gap in between that cut, you need to go to the hospital to pull it together. When you pull it together and you get sewn up, the original function is restored. If you do not go to the hospital with a gaping wound, what will happen is the connective tissue will fill in that wound and you will get a scar. So the original function is lost. The first step of repair is inflammation. Inflammation is the release of chemicals that causes the vessels that are cut to dilate, giving you increased blood supply. Then you get clotting. So here it is. Here's the cut. Here's the cut. All right? Inflammation sets the stage. Step 2 is organization. Organization restores the blood supply. That's why your blood clots. And now that area is replaced by a new capillary enriched tissue called granulation tissue. The epithelium begins to regenerate. Fibroblasts produce collagen. The white cells come and get rid of the debris. And then you regenerate. You either regenerate or you fibrose. Remember, regeneration is the same tissue. Fibrosis is that connective tissue is there. If you regenerate, you retain function. If you fibrose, you lose function. Okay? So that is tissue repair. That is tissue repair. And you can go through this. It shows you what happens. All right? Tissues that regenerate extremely well are basically all tissues, okay, except for muscle. Smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue are moderate. But what is more important is the tissues that do not regenerate. And the basic 2 tissues that don't regenerate are cardiac muscle and nervous tissue. Okay? Obviously, there is research every day to try and regenerate these tissues, but cardiac muscle and nervous tissue have no functional regenerative capacity. All right? A scar, a scar is there when you don't go to the hospital to get your cut put back together. And connective tissue comes in between your skin. You get a scar. And that is it. Any questions on anything